Bună dimineața și bun găsit la BU. Sunt Sabina Iosub și vă invit să rămâneți alături de mine în următoarea jumătate de oră, căci o să discutăm despre felul în care Europa devine tot mai verde, care sunt măsurile, cât ne costă și cum putem atinge obiectivele. Aflăm în doar câteva clipe. Today here with me in the European Parliament in Strasbourg is Damian Boslager. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you for the invitation.
We are discussing at the European level about how to become greener for some time now. Let's explain to our viewers what are the objectives and how far are we to reach them, or how close are we?
So I think we made a big step in this mandate of the European Union. So since 2019, when we started with the European Green Deal, I think a lot has happened when it comes to setting targets for climate emissions, for understanding how we can adjust the carbon borders, basically how we can make sure that the products that come into the European Union, if they're not following the emission standards that we have, how we can tax them accordingly. And basically we have considered how we can create green jobs all across the European Union to ensure that when we do the transition and we ramp out of these brown jobs, we actually create more green jobs. And for my movement Volt, that is also in Romania, this is a very core mission as well.
We've seen some very big and important crises appearing through these years. We are talking about the pandemic, we are talking about the situation in Ukraine, the energy crisis. We are seeing now what's happening in Israel and will have an impact also on the European Union. How is all the situation, all the global situation affecting this area of becoming greener?
It's very important that we understand that we can only deal with these issues, with these challenges or with these tragedies in a good way if we do it together as a European Union. I think that's absolutely clear. We need to be able to act, which is also why we should consider reforming the European Union to become better in foreign policy, better in health policy, so to deal with pandemics, but also better in ideas of how to deal with crises outside the European Union, as the brutal war and that Russia is waging in Ukraine, but also with the terrorist attacks of Hamas. So there is questions of how we can get better in supporting our allies, and I think that needs reform also within the European Union. We can at the same time not forget to do the greening of the economy, because the planet isn't waiting for us to get ready. Like we have a climate crisis and we need to address it urgently with everything that we can.
Do we have the money to do this, taking into consideration the new crisis that appeared?
I think from a regulatory perspective, funds and investment or public money is not always the solution. So we have, for example, ideas of how to work better with emission certificates. We can, expand that to all industries. We can stop the subsidies for certain fossil fuels or for all fossil fuels that would actually gain us some money. Yeah? So I think we should also be aware of the fact that, yes, the transition will cost, especially actually for industry, to shift from the brown jobs to the green jobs. But from a regulator perspective, maybe we need to also support in education, in upskilling, reskilling and so on. But it's not always public cash that will make this transition. It will also need private changes, and it will need different incentives from a tax system, and also when it comes to emissions.
Examples are good. Give us the example of your country, of Germany. What have done in the last years, and what's the goal, and maybe the steps to reach it?
So Germany has been trying to address very much the question of energy consumption in households. And I think that is a good way to start, because we know that energy consumption is quite high in households. I mean, there's also industry, there's transport. So we need to look at all these pillars, and I think it's good to make advances. I think we have also learned that it can be quite controversial if you force citizens too much in a certain direction. And I think we can go a bit more in an incentive approach of saying, like, look, if you go in this direction, maybe you can get some tax cuts. I think what's also clear is that the speeding up of permitting for renewables is a key factor to make the transition green and fast.
It's also a change in mentality, and that is very difficult to reach. How can we do it? How can we explain to those who don't have the money or don't have the time or simply don't want to do the change?
When President Biden says, when I hear climate change, I hear jobs, I think that's smart messaging. There's a huge future industry. We need to be able to use that opportunity, the huge potential that we have for this industry. We need to make sure that regionally it works, because in some places maybe the brown jobs will be in specific regions, and then we need to make sure that there's also green job alternatives there. So I think we should paint a picture of how interesting and how competitive the European economy will become if we do this green transition fast and well, and then I think we can also win over people and their hearts and their minds for this transition.
One may think that pollution is global, but the actions are taken only at the European level. The European Union is that one that has certain rules for reducing the pollution. So what will be actually the effect?
It's very important that we start to think bigger. Yeah? So, I mean, very often, to be honest, we think regionally or nationally, and it's a big start already to bring these different European nations together and say, let's think as a European Union. In the European Union, or in Europe in general, we are basically accountable to a lot of the CO2 emissions over the last 100 years. So I think it's important that we go ahead with a positive example. But yes, we will also need a global compact. We will need to refine our targets in the COP process. And I think it's important that we keep on pushing there. But we cannot do that if we as Europe are not making the first step to get there and to show that there are jobs available if we go in this direction.
Going electric is not so simple as it was thought. We've seen this, and we've seen also some examples in Germany in terms of people that were not having all the money, let's say, to put in the electric area. Also not so efficient in terms of costs, as we've seen the prices were at the sky during the crisis. So what should we do?
So Germany's energy system was very much built on Russian gas. And obviously, with the brutal attack of Russia and Ukraine, that had to stop and change. And so what we realized in Germany is that you need to look at the whole energy grid, both when it comes to production. It needs to be green production, renewable production of energy, but then you also need to look at the consumption. And there are certain industries which are very difficult to electrify. We can talk about boats, for example, large ships, container ships, very hard to electrify at this point, or even crackers that split different materials or gases into different materials. These are things that are very difficult to electrify, and so I think now also for the next mandate, what the European Union should really do is work with private sector entities to understand what is the energy grid of Europe going to look like? What kind of consumption patterns do we have in what kind of local areas? How can we increase the capacity of the electricity grid, but also how can we make it smarter so that local consumption needs meet local production needs, and what kind of role can hydrogen play? What kind of new technologies, small modular reactors and so on, can we come up with to basically meet all these consumption needs that we see?
Also, we have to see what type of energy can and do we produce at the European level, because it was a huge debate regarding, for example, the coal mines. You know the situation in Poland, you know that Romania was also asking for some new steps. Also in Germany, it was this discussion of reopening some coal mines due to the energy crisis. So do we need another calendar for doing all of this?
I don't think the world is giving us the time to slow this down further. So it's clear the calendar cannot be set by us, but it's actually set by climate change, which means that we are in a situation where we need to get faster, not slower. We have in Germany, I think, made an experience of trying to get out of nuclear energy fast, which then led to a rise of coal consumption. So that was not a very smart strategy from a climate perspective. Maybe it was from, when you think about the trash or about security, but from a climate perspective, this was not the right way to go. So I think we need to find new solutions, and we have smart minds thinking about that. How can we get out of coal, out of fossil fuels in general, as fast as possible, and find a grid across Europe working with each other to understand how we can build an electricity, but an energy market in general that works for all Europeans, but also for the climate.
Damien Boslager, in the end of our discussion, what is your message for those who are watching you right now?
My message is we need to work together in Europe to solve all the issues, including climate change, but all the other things that we currently see as crises. And that is also what my movement, Volt, stands for.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.